pop out all the chats that I need. Okay. What is up, folks? Hello, all effect enjoyers out there.
Hello, hello.
Welcome to another riveting episode of Effect Office Hours. I know it's what you all look forward to at the middle of every week. Let me make sure that my slides work. So Mattia and I thought it would be fun, or maybe not like fun, but as a way to kind of allow the folks who wanted to see the Effect Miami presentation I gave, or the presentation at Effect Miami that I gave. We thought it would be fun to just quickly run through my slides, and then if you guys have any questions, we can talk about it. And this is not really meant to be like presentation style. It's more meant to be like asking questions and trying to figure out, like, you know, if there's stuff that I can answer for you folks. Mattia can also pepper me with questions since he also hasn't seen this. But yeah, we tried to record all of the talks at Effect Miami, but unfortunately Mike shut off the recording right as I was starting my talk. He just didn't want this to be documented.
So,
is anybody hearing background noise when I talk?
I hear sometimes. I'm not sure if they come from me, but I can try to mute myself and we'll see.
Let's see. It might honestly be me. I don't know. If anybody hears any background noise on my mic when I'm talking, now that Mattia's muted, let me know. See if we can fix this issue. That was on purpose. Indeed, it was. We decided to take a break for 20 minutes in between the Dax's talk and my talk at Effect Miami. And Mike interpreted that as I forgot to start the recording for myself. So like a ventilator. So surprisingly clear background noise. Nope. Mike is telling me that we have background noise, but I'm hearing from everybody in chat that I do not. Maybe it's the lawnmower outside. I'm also, from the folks watching on Twitch, they also say they don't hear any background noise. So I'm just going to keep going. Sounds like a mic problem.
I hear sometimes something, but it seems like something like a very light, like.
Yeah, that's probably the lawnmower outside, which will be gone.
Oh, okay.
Hopefully soon. Let me share my screen. Entire screen. This title's not clickbait, I swear. Enter full screen. It's not clickbait, I swear. Let's see what Davide says in post recording. Yeah, it's got to be the lawnmower that's coming and going, because as it drives closer to this side is when Mike tells me that he hears stuff. So anyway, maybe my mic should find a more silent place. Yeah. Anywho, so yeah, I went down to the Effect Miami meetup, which was a great event put on at the lab in Miami. So thank you again to the folks at the lab for hosting the meetup there. And it was organized by Ariel, one of our community members. And it was a fantastic event. There were probably like 50 or 60 people there, maybe. I'm just totally guessing, but there was quite a substantial audience. Um, and it was just like it was a very cool event too, because it was a lot of folks who had like heard about Effect but hadn't started using it yet, were evaluating it for their companies maybe. So it was a lot of like talking to people about why they were interested in Effect and like what could Effect do for them, and kind of the cool parts about Effect. Yeah, so it was like a really interesting audience. Typically when we go to like Effect days or whatever, it's like already everybody who's just like Effect pilled and wants to talk nerd out about Effect. But in this case, it was more like talking to people who are like evaluating the technology. So it was a really fun event. And yeah, so I went last. So both Ariel and Dax gave really, really good talks. Ariel kind of focused on like Effect for agentic development from like a practical perspective. You can watch his talk on YouTube. And Dax also talked about Effect for how they use Effect at open code. So open code is an open source code base, obviously, so you can go take a look. But he kind of walked through the things that they have been getting the most value out of so far with Effect, as the whole team sort of like gets used to using it and is learning it and whatever. So both were really, really great talks. And then I came in and just ruined the whole thing with my clickbait presentation. You don't have to mute yourself, Mattia, because I'm pretty sure the noise isn't coming from you. I
Oh,
think
no
it's
worries.
on my end. But anyway, I figured I'd run through the slides and just sort of like talk a little bit about what I spoke about there. If there's questions, you can stop me. Mattia, you can interrupt me at any point. I kind of don't want to have to give this presentation twice, so it can be very casual. But I started off this talk by kind of polling the audience about who in the audience was an engineer, because it was a mixed audience of like both engineering and non-engineering. But the majority of folks were engineers. And the second question I posed was, how many folks are using agentic coding tools in their daily work? And every single engineer in the room obviously raised their hand. And so the point being that agentic coding tools have become quite ubiquitous in the past year or two, which is pretty wild if you think about uh, how quickly the whole way that we go about software engineering and software development. It's not Twitter hype, it's X hype. Listen, I'm from the I'm a 90s kid. I still call it Twitter. You can't change my mind. But anyway, the third question I asked the audience was, what if who in the audience has had the experience of writing some code with their agent and then having to scrap everything that they wrote because the agent just went wild and wrote total slop? And again, pretty much everybody in the audience raised their hand and had that experience. And so the point I was making is that these tools are really great, but they have problems, and we're spending a lot of effort now engineering our harnesses, trying to figure out different ways of prompting agents, using skills, all of these different tools to try to keep an agent on track, engineering the environment that the agents run in. And we spend a lot of time on this, so I think it's worthwhile to kind of like talk about different ways you can keep your agent from writing slop, and why so many people are talking about Effect for that use case. Uh, so I don't really need to introduce myself here, but there I did. So this is my slide. I need to get a slide like Mattia's recursion slide for my presentations. Um, but anyway, I moved on to this slide, which was kind of talking about why so many folks are talking about effect for agentic development, you know, obviously I could stand up there and talk about how great effect is, all the tools it provides, and blah 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 blah. But obviously, people are going to consider me biased since I'm a core contributor to effect, and so the point of this slide was to basically tell people, you know, don't take my word for it. Look around in the community and see all the other folks who are respected in the community who are engineering like real world applications with agentic coding tools and using effect and getting a lot of mileage out of effect for that purpose. You know, there's many people out there talking about how good effect is for agentic development. So again, you don't have to take my word for it. Go read Twitter, Mike, and you can see for yourself. And one of the tweets that I really like is actually from Matt Pocock, where he talks about how there's literally no better agentic experience. I think I can link to it. Yeah. There's literally no better agentic experience for building backend type stuff in TypeScript. Once you see it through that lens, it's addictive. And then Kit just, you know, reacting that it's the greatest day of his life. So again, it's not just us, the effect community, the effect developers talking about how good it is. There's other people out there too discussing effect and why it's so good for this purpose. But the logical next question becomes, you know, why? Why is effect considered so good for agentic development? What properties does effect have that make it a really good fit for agents? And what are the like tools that effect gives an agent that makes it so that makes it a great assist for the agent to write good quality software? Open code testimonial would be good on that slide too. Yeah. Well, there's Dax tweets about effect, I think. But anyway, I moved on to, so we wanted to talk about like why effect is so good for this purpose, blah, blah, blah. And I said to understand why effect is so good, we have to first take a step back and talk about like the coding loop, the agentic coding loop that we all go through every single day while we're working on our different projects. And usually it starts with some prompt, right? It could be a simple message that you send to the agent, or it could be like a crazy detailed specification that you've spent, you know, half hour working with your agent, fine tuning and creating all these different subtasks and whatever. But at the end of the day, you're feeding some input into the agent to produce the code that you want. And then the agent will take that input and it will perform some generations. It'll write the code that you've specified that you want. It'll try to accomplish the tasks you've given it. And once the code's been written, most of our code bases have some checks built into them, right? You know, linting, formatting, et cetera, et cetera. There are some checks that are built in, and then sometimes the agent will also run the code and do smoke tests and things like that to figure out if things are working properly. But I kind of want to focus, you know, when talking about effect and why it's so good and what tools it gives the agent, I want to really focus on both the generation and the check phase, because I think this is where we get the most bang for our buck out of effect. So if we first focus on like the generate phase of this, you know, back and forth, there are properties of effect like for coding itself that make it really, really good for agents. It's the same properties that make effect good for coding for humans once you get over like that syntax hurdle, right? Human brain has to get over the syntax burden of effect. Agents don't care. So they can really be productive immediately with effect. And what do I mean by like the syntax? Like what is helpful about effect syntax that make it good for agents? Well, one thing is it's very structural. So pretty much every effect program is written the same way, or can be written the same way, the same structural way, right? There was a tweet from Dylan a while ago about how you use generators for writing your business logic, and then you compose higher order behavior onto that effect program in the pipeline afterward. And you could give that framework to your agent, and every single effect program could follow that exact same pattern. Every effect you build in your app could just be composed from those two rules, right? But you can take it a step further and show your agent the canonical way that you and your team like to engineer services. And what's great about that is all of the business logic related to that one thing, that one concept, gets encapsulated inside that service. So there's the property of having nice little boxes of logic that are related to a particular domain or concept. It's really great for agents because it allows the agent to stay really focused and have very um, tailored context when developing a particular piece of code in your app, as opposed to like more standard TypeScript code bases where agents might need a lot more context to be able to work on a particular piece of logic or behavior in your app. And also, services have a defined structure to them as well that fits in really nicely with the way that agents write code. I don't know if you folks have noticed, but Sam actually talked about this a few weeks ago on Effect Office Hours. But agents really do have a tendency to like write helpers first, and then like at the very bottom of the file they write the actual like logic that you're interested in. And that fits in kind of well with the way that you build services in Effect, because you first engineer the interface of your service, like the contract you want it to expose, and then all the business logic and stuff like that happens at the bottom of the file usually. So there is like kind of a nice mapping there, but getting back to our loop here, there are structural qualities about Effect that make it really good for the generation phase of like actual writing code. But even more than that, the loop that you go through between generating and then performing checks and feeding the output of these checks back into subsequent generations, this miniature loop inside the overall agentic coding loop is even more important, right? Giving the agents the ability to run like specific checks that are tailored towards your app and the type of code that you want to write is extremely important to keep the agent on track and like make sure it's writing the right things. You think of like the most basic things could be, like I said before, linting and formatting, type checking, and things like that. If you've got the effect LSP installed, which you should, you can get even more semantic information out of the type checking phase, which we can show in a minute here. Um, but when an agent is writing an effect program, it has access to the whole world of that program right in the type signature. So it really has to do a lot less work to figure out what is that program going to produce, what could it potentially fail with, and what does it need to actually run, right? That's all encoded in the type signature. And obviously you can build on top of this, right? Within a particular code base, you can engineer even more back pressure. So pushing back from checks into the generation phase, that like back pressure engineering, the agent to regenerate code to follow patterns from your code base. Um, and it's really easy to do with Effect because you have so much information in the type system. And again, a really great example of that, doing that, engineering back pressure into your agentic loops, is the language service plugin. So like these are two simple examples of the Effect LSP at work. Um, I like this example on the left of like the floating effect problem. It's the same concept as like the floating promise problem. Not exactly the same because a floating promise is actually running, but a floating effect is not. But the idea is the same, where if you're never like yielding or using this effect at all, it's floating, it's never going to run. And this would type check if you don't run the effect LSP as part of type checking. Like this would actually be a program that fully types checks, but has like semantic errors in it, right? You'll never see this log in your program. But by engineering that additional back pressure in with the effect LSP at compile time, you can feed this diagnostic, which we're seeing, during development, into the agent at compile time. So the agent can actually get access to that information and fix this. And the messages that you get out of the LSP are in plain English. They're in a language that the agent understands. And so it's much easier for the agent to take this and use this feedback to fix this problem, right? It's very targeted. Similarly, this program on the right actually wouldn't compile. This would fail type checking. But if we don't have the effect LSP installed, all the agent gets is type user repo is not assignable to never. That's not really like useful for a coding agent. It's very difficult for like we might know what that means as people who are like working on effect programs and like have that context in our head, but an agent is going to have no idea. Like it's going to have to do a lot more work to figure this out. But with the effect LSP installed, again, a tool that's putting additional back pressure into the agent to regenerate code based on feedback, it gets a plain English description of the problem. The effect requires a service that's missing from the context, the user repository, and it can use that information to fix this problem, right? So the main concept I'm trying to get across here is that you can use effect programs. Like effect has a lot of properties that make it really easy to not only like do the code generation phase, but also to engineer additional back pressure and checks into your program.
One
Go ahead, Mattia.
one thing that is basically the takeaway, I would say that that's not something you can do because that's a tool like the LSP, but it's something you can do because the properties of effect have that very strong semantic encoding embedded in the type system and /or in the code, and that's something that's the real property that no other framework or no other like library has. No other library has that strong semantic encoded in type system. That's the thing that leverages the possibility to do those back pressure tools. Without that, you cannot do that.
And there's even more tools built into the LSP that the agent can use to get information out of an effect program because of how much information is encoded in the type system, because effects are lazy and can be like inspected before they're actually run, right? There's a lot more information you can get access to in an effect program than in a plain TypeScript program. So there's quite a bit of to discuss here about like why effect has all these great properties that make it good for coding agents. And we could talk a lot more about this if you folks have questions. But the logical like next question you might have is if we looked at this agentic loop, you'll notice I'm missing a piece over here, right? And I think right now, we as developers who are using these coding agents in our daily lives are extremely focused on the local development loop. And I don't just mean like local development as in like the agents running locally. Obviously, you might have agents running in sandboxes and whatever, but the point is we're focused on the actual development of software with our coding agents. And I think that's fine. That's where we're starting, but I don't think that's where we're going. And I think there is a massive gap right now here, which is when the software is actually running, right? When your application is actually running in production. Right now, there are very few tools out there. So there's much less interesting discussion and tooling going on in this space where your application is actually running, but we're not using that feedback in any way, shape, or form to further improve the code that's making up our application. And I think effect has a real opportunity to shine here as well. So where I think we're going is kind of beyond just code generation, where the feedback loop is expanding into more of the software development lifecycle and the agentic information that you get out. The information that the agent provides to you becomes useful not just for the software developer, not just for the software developers on the team, but also for other folks involved in the software development lifecycle, like your C-suite or your product engineers or your salespeople, whatever. There's a lot more information that the agent can make use of from a running application, in my opinion, than from the app at rest. And so we're kind of like here right now, right? Where our loops are primarily running on code. I think we're getting more into this space with like code review agents that are running on PRs and things like that. agents running in CI to do things. But I think where we're going is kind of here, where there will be the concept of like an always on agent that actually uses information coming from your running application to figure out things that can be improved. And so instead of the agent being like just a code editor, I think it'll become much more of like an operator in the future. And so, like, the logical conclusion to this is that instead of the prompt being something we feed into the agent to get it to do something, the application is going to become the prompt. The application is going to be the thing that feeds agents with context needed to continuously improve the application, the system, et cetera, et cetera. And I like to use the term software factory for this type of like application feeding context into the agent to continuously improve the application, right? That whole kind of like a larger scope agentic development loop. And it all starts with like signals that your application exposes. And again, I think this is a huge opportunity for effect to be very beneficial for folks because you get all of these things built in, right? You have logging built in, you have metrics built in, you have traces built in, you have errors built in. And so you already have a wealth of information you can expose from your application to your running agents. But even beyond that, if you like keep going, right? And you keep thinking about, okay, like what information do humans use to improve applications? Well, we use user feedback through the form of like ticket systems or feedback systems, whatever. We look at traffic patterns in our application. We look at benchmarks. We look at all sorts of different things about our running apps to improve them. And I think these signals about our application are things that we could feed into this like hypothetical software factory. And inside this software factory, these kind of always on agents are synthesizing all of this information together. They're kind of like deciding what to do with it and figuring out ways that they can, excuse me, improve the application. They can fix issues for you automatically and open PRs on your behalf. They can verify information that's coming out of your application. They can detect anomalies before you even notice them. They can figure out opportunities for improvement based on these signals that are coming in. And this is all really interesting. And I think like the software factory, again, my hypothesis is that this is going to be like the future. I think this is like we're already seeing companies moving in this direction where agents are getting access to more like runtime information to do things. But I want to be really clear. I don't really think that this negates the need for humans to be in the loop. I actually think in the future where software factory is kind of the new agentic loop, I think humans are even more important in that scenario than we are in the coding loop, because we need to look at this information and figure out, okay, like the agent's giving me all of this, like these things. There's fixes coming in. There's new features that the agent's proposing based on application feedback. There's new features I want to implement in the app that the agent hasn't brought up. And so I think it's actually going to be even more critical for humans to be in the loop and in control of the software factory. And so I think my hypothesis is like there will be some automated actions that humans allow basically humans will have the ability to determine which of these things agents can act on autonomously, which things we want to remain in control of, and then also like give our own feedback into the software factory, like, hey, you haven't mentioned that feature X is something that I want in the app, so why don't we go ahead and figure out how to build that.
Yeah.
um Go ahead, Mateo.
I really like the terms that you put on the bottom, like prioritize, review, and approve as the main focus for the humans, because that is something that focus on how at least I have like been perceiving recently, that thanks to the new LLMs that we have, the new tools that we have, we are all basically moving away from being just pure coders and we are slowly more and more becoming like code reviewer and product manager, deciding what's the next, and also approving what goes in production and what's not. And I really like also how that projects to the software factory idea, because if we have a software factory, then we become something like a production supervisor. We are not the one that are actually producing software. We are the one supervising how it's being produced. So we are basically supervising the flows, we are supervising how things are going, and we just put our hints where things are going bad or are not going in the direction we actually want the entire production to go to. Even though I don't like the terms software factory, it's true, it's how it's called, but I don't like that because it gives the idea that it's too fast, it's producing a lot, and we connect usually something a lot to something not good. But that's behind the scene what it really is, because it's automated for the most part, so we should speak about the factory.
I see. Oh God, Mike. The other thing that I want to point out here is that the human in the loop is not just the engineer in this scenario. Because the software like factory concept is exposing a lot of information, the human in the loop could also be non-technical individuals, right? It could be people like, like you said before, your sales associates, your C-suite, your whatever, like people who want to get insight into parts of the application that are under development, for example, right? There's a lot that can go into this bucket. It's not just like information's going in and fixes are coming out. There's a lot of other pieces of this software factory that could be beneficial to other members of the team, right? Like you could imagine the agents feeding all of this information in, and your sales team is seeing like, it suggests to your sales team, for example, that traffic is like really high at for particular I don't know, like there are different things that could go in here that are not just engineering focused. Software factory also feels like a buzzword from day zero, like vibe coding. It is a buzzword.
Yeah.
You're welcome. I see Max decided to spoil our product roadmap. You're welcome. So yeah, I think that it's no secret that like this is where companies are moving. I think that like there are a lot of folks moving in this direction already. Think of like there was a big announcement from like Linear a few months ago about moving their tooling in this direction. There's a bunch of other companies like Sentry has some tooling going in this direction, right? So like, I don't think it's any secret that this is the logical progression of things. But I think it's very, very early. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to like do this correctly, do it well, do it right, and give people the primitives to do this nicely. And that was the end of my talk. My slides are here on my GitHub. And yeah, so if you have questions, let me know. But otherwise, we can talk about like effect code now. Were there questions, Mattia? I wasn't really paying attention.
I don't think so. Let me double check again.
You missed the 24-hour cluster stream.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. We just ended it like right before you logged on FIWS. We've been live since yesterday.
No, there weren't anyone. There is a new one. Can you talk about how the program's meaning adapts in this context?
Can you talk about how the program's meaning adapts in this context? I think I'm not 100% sure I understand the question, Ariel, but I think that the application in this case, like I think that that's what you mean by program, is like very much a source of signals in this context, right? Like you can imagine you could imagine the application as a stream of signals and the factory as a sink for those signals. And basically, the code is like a secondary thing in this future world, right? The more important parts are the higher level things that, as engineers, we tend to worry about in addition to writing the code. So, like, the availability of our applications and things like that are different pieces of signals that could be coming in, the metrics associated with our application and whatnot. I'm not 100% sure if I answered the question. Like meaning can be corrupted as the program app evolves. Yeah, I mean, I think that's true now too. I think that you could argue that if you leave an agent unsupervised for long enough in a code base implementing features and whatnot, you're going to end up with slop or something that you didn't intend, right? The end result of the product with an unsupervised agent probably will end up looking a lot different than you wanted. So that's why, I think that if we go back a slide, I think that the human in the loop is really key here. Like we have to be part of the whole process, not just like this, but like feeding the right signals in is also key, right? If you give your agents crap, it's going to produce crap. It's the same concept for local coding. If the context is crap, you're going to get crap. And then still, like, yes, the factory piece, watching this happen is important, but also deciding like what things has the agent done, suggested, autonomously detected, what of that actually matters. And so that's why I think like it's almost more important for us to be in control in that world.
And I think that there is no way to get rid of that and of the problem of having an application that evolves over time and then gets, let's say, broken internally in the meaning of what the application does, because that's something that happens in real life as well. When you have at least two persons speaking, there is space for misunderstanding, and when things evolve over time, there is space for not be kept on the same topic, the same pace, and the same like is with the code we deal with and with the agent we deal with. We need to always be sure that we are speaking the same language the agent is speaking. We need also to be sure that if we change idea on something, we need to reevaluate everything we did before to see how that aligns to the new idea. And that's something I think we could not like get rid of. But indeed, I also would say that there is something where probably the next generation of tooling will focus on, because given that now we have moved one level up, I think that that will become what we will be more interested on. At least that my opinion. Not sure if everyone else agrees, but I would say that we will see next generation of tooling focusing more on that and less on the actual like code that we usually dealt with, because we are changing how we work and how we approach the software.
Constantly. The way that we write software is different like this month than it was 3 months ago.
Yeah.
Right? Like constantly changing. We're like rediscovering loops all over again. Like I don't understand that whole discourse going on X right now. It's kind of dumb, but like the every single month, like things are changing, and I think it's going to keep changing. And my hypothesis is this is where we end up.
Yeah. And one last thing that I will say connected to what you mentioned before about Effect having this nice property of defining, for example, services first with the shape and then having the layer implementation on bottom, is also that for the same reason that we need to prioritize, review, and approve code, the problem is that right now we are in a situation where we produce code faster than we can actually review and make it correct. And so I also think that eventually we will have a new generation of tools that will not use just code diffs as a way to review code, because I would say that the problem with code diffs is that they are basically the highest level, the lowest, level you can get of detail. You are getting all of the detail of what changed. but you are not getting like the intent of the changes. And that's why we are seeing recently, for example, semantic diffs coming on rather than plain old code diffs, because again, we have now a lot of code changes that are I cannot say free, but they are basically faster than they were before, and now we have the bottleneck that has become reviewing and approving the changes.
There was a question in Discord unrelated
Yeah.
to this, which was from David. I have a quick question. I've migrated most, if not all, of my applications to v4, Effect v4. LLMs write better Effect in v4, but I was curious if you had any recommendations of modules to stay away from in production. No, I think even when the whole thing comes out of beta, I think that the unstable modules are always going to be a source of churn until they become stable. But that's no different than using packages from Effect v3 that are not considered stable, which is basically the whole ecosystem except for Effect. So I don't really think there's any modules that I would recommend staying away from per se. Like, I don't have any. I don't know if you feel any differently, Mattia.
No, I also would say that probably let's get connected back to what we were saying before, that probably in the past I would have been more scared about a module being unstable, and by unstable I mean that a lot of changes could happen in how you interact with the module, the API, and whatever. But I also would say that probably today, thanks to Agent, I am also feeling less concerned about that, because sure, there is churn, but usually is not so high as it was before. It's easier now to get rid of the churn, because you can then look at what changed, tell the agent, okay, this changed from this to this, can you please update that, verifying the tests that still works as it was expected before. So yeah, I would say that maybe I'm saying something risky, but I would not care too much about modules to stay away. As Maxwell said, most of them in the ecosystem were marked unstable, but we are now getting to an era where that's becoming less of a churn. It was higher before, and now it's getting lesser.
There were a couple of questions in the chat that I'd like to comment on. One was from Daniel saying that I wouldn't call the only thing preventing slop rotting your code base a bottleneck, but it is. Like, the bottleneck before coding agents was writing the code. That was the rate limiting step of software development, was developing the code. Now, the rate limiting step, the bottleneck, is not writing the code. You could write millions of lines of code in a day with an agent, sure. But it might be slop, sure. But the bottleneck is reviewing that code, which is the thing that prevents the slop. So I don't fully agree with that statement. I think that calling it a bottleneck is perfectly fine, because it is. It's the rate limiting step. Just like writing the code was the bottleneck before. There was also a question, or I don't know if it's a question or comment. There was resistance to working heavily with agents because it's not something you can just run locally. I'd imagine this happens at every evolution. Thoughts on getting over those hurdles? I kind of agree with Mike's point here. Running agents locally is not really feasible, because, like, yes, we all do some degree of agentic coding locally now, but at scale for this type of thing that we're talking about, I foresee these systems being sandboxed by default, like agents working within isolated environments where they have the ability to ingest this information and have copies of the code base and can, like I said, open PRs and things like that. And I think the human having fine-tuned control over what the agent can do, even in that distributed environment where you're operating the software factory and all your agents by default are executing in sandboxes, I think the human having the ability to control exactly like what permissions and things like that the agent has the ability to do. Like what can an agent open a PR for you or not? Can it just suggest things, right? Like I think those fine-grained permissions become much more important as well. And Mike also makes a good point about running models locally. So where was the question? Because to run a good model locally, you need 8 B300s at a minimum. Yeah. If you have 8 B300s, more power to you. Run models locally. That sounds wonderful. But I'm also a believer in the some of the comments I've seen Mike make on X, Twitter, whatever. I literally have to mentally map Twitter to X in my brain to say it. I can't do it. I give up. It's Twitter for me. And I made this comment in my Effect Miami talk, but I also think that a world is rapidly approaching where smaller, denser, more specialized open weights models become the much more common for particular tasks. Like right now, you open your coding agent, you pretty much just have it set to GPT-5.5 or Claude Fable or whatever garbage you're using, and you don't change the model. I foresee a world where we're always changing the model that we're using for it, like tailored to specific tasks, right? These smaller, denser models, as token subsidies go away, and we start realizing that it costs real money to run these like frontier models, and we start paying like API pricing. I think that the smaller open weights models are just naturally going to gain a larger and larger market share simply because they're less expensive to run and you can get very high quality output from them if you are running them with the tasks that they're designed for.
And also not just less expensive, but usually that also connects to faster, which eventually is what everyone wants. So because right now in any application that you have right now, if you are using AI in your application right now, probably one of the slower tasks you have in your application right now is invoking your LLM provider. So imagine a feature where that gets under the 100 milliseconds threshold, and that's basically where eventually we will have very specialized ones that can be almost as fast as they can, so that you don't care, I think, too much about the cost because they are fast, they are cheap. You just care about choosing the right one for the right task.
Yeah, it'll be like using the right coding language for a particular task, or picking like the right, I don't know, library or framework for a particular task. It's just my hypothesis is that in the future, these open weights models will become much, much more common. There was a comment from Daniel replying to us. If you write faster code, it doesn't mean that you need to increase the review at the same rate. It's still faster than having to write it entirely. Even if it's a bottleneck, it doesn't need to be considered bad. We're not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it is a bottleneck. It is the bottleneck. Obviously, you could just increase review at this and get let slop into your code base, but you don't want to. You want the review to be the place where you, the human, are giving the back pressure to your agent, right? You have as many automated pieces of back pressure in your code base as possible. And then you as the human, when you get to the point of reviewing your code, is like the final boss of back pressure for the agent. So it's not a bad thing to be a bottleneck. Writing code before, was the bottleneck, but writing code, it wasn't a bad thing. It just like was the rate limiting step. So you can't, it's not a bad thing, but it is it's just the truth. It is if you want to, if you're reviewing code, that's the bottleneck now.
Yeah, the word bottleneck is not bad by itself. It's just mentioning that if you are putting an input of X amount of productivity, you are now reducing that because you have something in the chain that's cutting that off. But that does not that does not mean that's bad. That just means that that's the point where if you want to improve the output, you should focus first, because that's where you're cutting off most of it. And also, there was a question about the issue, is LLMs will ignore best practice to match the current slop practice of your repo. And that connects to what Maxwell has been saying, that if you see a slop in your repo, the thing that you should now care about is engineering the back pressure so that does not happen again. So you can let slop come in your repo, but then you need to look at it after and say, okay, why that there is that slop? How can I prevent it? Could I prevent that through linting? Could I prevent that through any analysis? Could I prevent that by having another agent with an empty context just be given the git diff and being asked a specific question, like, I don't want this specific pattern. Is that pattern present in this git change? If yes, stop me and tell me where it needs to be fixed. If not, go ahead and pass that to the next step of the chain, right?
Yeah.
That's still back pressure. You don't need to think back pressure as something that's strictly done by tools or by humans. It could be done by other agents as well. You can have a coding agent and then a reviewing agent, and that's still back pressure, because the reviewing agent is basically stopping code and slop to going into the code base by saying, no, I don't want this.
Not to derail the conversation, let me pull this window over. But to there's a good conversation going on in the chat right now about what I meant when I say that, like, smaller, more specialized models will start becoming much more ubiquitous. And Mike made a couple of really good points that I'll read and then I'll change this. But so to clarify, and Mike did a good job of clarifying this, you wouldn't change models per task. You'd have sub-agents and specialized agents that use the best model for the task by default. Manually switching is a bad thing. Routing is also not good. The issue is you're starting from manually prompting into a local agent with no context. So it's a tooling issue. And it's not much different if you know that the prompt you're launching will cost you $100 or more, right? Like, if you know that, using a you're going to be more careful about the models that you decide to use. And it doesn't necessarily have to be local open weights models, right? I think companies are going to become much more interested in developing these models. Like, I think it's just like it just makes sense. Like, I don't think there's any. I'm not sure how you could argue that point.
It's the same model the real world works, right? If you want to have something specific being done correctly, you go to a consultant which is specified in that, right? And that's kind of the same things with agents, right? If you want a very specific task to be done correctly at a good ratio for the money you pay and what you get out, probably you go to someone that's specialized only into that. And the same, I would say, applies to the models.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a request, changing gears. There's a request in the Office Hours channel from Lloyd to do a review of a PR on stream, which we can try to do. And I will make this bigger. So the idea is, add support for merging external events into a custom prompt. I've been wanting a way to link external data into Prompt.custom in a way that triggers a re-render without needing to press a keystroke. In the current implementation, I need a way to fake a keystroke as a hacky workaround, or build my own render loop from scratch. Ideally, what I wanted was an API where I could just pass in a stream of events and be able to trigger the action with the next state. I've been digging around in prompt for a while. I already knew that terminal read input was a queue. What I settled on was a type overload where there's the current implementation without the event doing the same thing, and a new type that adds the new events. This way, the queue can be a progressive enhancement on an already functioning user input-only prompt. The prompt isn't responsible for cleaning up the queue. This needs to be handled by the user. There's still a very small possibility of an event and a user input happening simultaneously. I don't think this is a concern. Queue needs to not fail, so the user is responsible outside of the prompt to handle these cases. Want to make an issue first? Let's take a look at the code. So the prompt races user input against events from the DQ, allowing background events to trigger re-renders without waiting for a key press. What is this receive thing? Is that already in my custom prompt interface? All right, well, let's open this diff this way. So no, receive is a new thing. So I guess, Lloyd, correct me if I'm wrong, but receive would be the thing that gets user events and decides like what action to take. Let's keep scrolling through the code. Optionally, an external events DQ can be provided as the third argument. When present, the render loop will race user input against the background. An event is received from the DQ. The receive handler is called instead of process. Not sure I like having a separate receive handler. I think what would be nicer is for process, the type of process. I don't know if this is possible because obviously I haven't spent any time with this PR, but I think what would be a nicer model is for process, if you pass an external queue in, I think it would be nicer for process to be overloaded with like a union of the user input versus the events that you've like passed in here. Because like having another handler that's basically doing the same thing as process is kind of annoying.
Also, not sure if I like too much the fact that you are giving a queue. Maybe it could be like something like that you give a stream, so that way that's acquired when the input is started and is closed when the custom prompt is ended, maybe.
So we're racing, taking from the input versus taking from the events. So this is user input versus events.
And then calls a different action based on the kind, which is basically...
I separated them so that if an existing Prompt.custom implementation wants to add external events afterwards, the process callback doesn't need to change. Yeah, I still don't think that this is the right choice. I think that merging into process, keeping the interface simple, I think outweighs that convenience. I don't like having a separate receive handler because then you're separating two concerns that are doing the same thing. Like this and this then are basically doing the exact same thing. It doesn't feel good. Like I think it makes more sense to force the user to update this later if they decide they want external events coming in. I think that a queue or something similar is required, Mattia, just because of the way that the render loop is implemented. It's as a while loop that processes like each event. I'm not sure. Again, I haven't spent a lot of time with this PR. Yeah, I think that this logic needs to be merged into. I think that the idea of this PR is fine. The other thing I would do, so let's do two things. I'm not sure an overload is required anymore if you're. So let's make some comments. I would suggest, I would prefer avoiding a separate receive handler and instead merge the event types into the process input and force the user to handle that logic there. Otherwise, we have two separate handlers that are the same thing. The other thing about this is, I mean, it's fine. It's not ideal, but it's fine. Is that because events is the last parameter here, process, where is it? Like if you merge the receive handler into process, and events becomes the last argument. Okay. If events is the last argument here, the A type that you're concerned with here won't, like this here will just be unknown until you pass the events in as the last argument. So like the the overload would instead have to be like initial state queue handlers. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Because other, like, you want this type to be fixed before you start specifying your handlers. Otherwise, the A type that you're merging into the process step will be unknown. So the overload would have to have like the events queue first.
Yeah.
The overload that takes the events queue probably should have the queue passed before the handlers so that the type of the events gets fixed before you specify handlers. Otherwise, you'll end up with, I forget what the type of handlers is, but it'll be like merging user input unknown until you specify. I mean, I guess this is not technically the case with an overload, because the first overload would be selected by TypeScript, and then only after you pass events would the second overload be selected. So maybe this is not really that much.
I would say still that I would keep that anyway, because like fixing first the A from the queue, maybe it's better because that the XYZ it will attempt to fix the A from the queue at least. What do you think?
Yeah, the other thing you could do is to make it even more flexible. Because right now, like events is just another parameter. We could have like an options argument that takes events as a parameter to keep it like really flexible. Right? Like I don't exactly know how that would work. Something to think
you mean
about,
like,
though, like
an object in between the initial state and the handlers giving the options?
Yeah, I'm not crazy about that because it makes the overloads a little bit harder to detect, because like TypeScript will think you're specifying the handlers until you pass the events parameter. This is like a maybe thing. I would definitely do this. Like I would remove receive and merge your events into process. I think this is like a maybe thing. The other thing to consider is one other thing to consider is using an options object to pass the external events queue to quote unquote future proof addition of further custom options. Let's just mark these. This is required for me to merge this. This is like a maybe thing. Requires some testing. Oops. And this is a maybe. The last thing I want to do, I'll leave this comment, and then let's just take a look at the implementation. Right now, the before was we take an element from the input queue, and then we process it to get the next action. Let me just unify this and look at the new implementation. So take input. Yeah, I would get rid of all of this. Like, I just get rid of this. Get rid of this. Like, I'm not sure how, like, without experimenting with it myself, it's going to be a little harder to like figure this out. But I think, I almost want to see if there's a way where you could like remove this discriminated union, but you might not be able to, right? You because basically on the user end, when you feed the final this result thing into process, the type here would be like user input or A, and if user input has the same shape as A, they'll overwrite one another. So maybe you do need to have a discriminated union being fed into process.
At least instead of passing user input or A, you should pass something like user input or event of A, something like that, just to wrap that and make sure that there is no way to overlap them.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the API that process should receive. I just know that I would not have two methods that are doing the same thing. You may need a discriminator for what gets past the process. It would be even more interesting if at the type level you could swap the types of process so that if you specify a queue, the process gets the discriminated union type, right? But if you don't specify a queue, you just get
the action,
the user input. I think that would be probably the best API that I can think of for now. It's like using conditional logic in your types to swap between a discriminated union or not if the user's passed an event. I like the idea though. I mean, I like the idea of being able to have a custom events that get merged with the existing one. I agree with Mattia. It feels a lot like a stream because with streams you can merge event sources, but like because of the way this is implemented, I think this is fine for now.
One could maybe, I mean, if you use the queue, probably one could attempt to introduce some kind of determinism by polling the queue for the custom events and choosing if taking from one or the other based on that.
I think if you interrupt the take, the element won't be dropped.
Yeah, the element, yeah.
So I think this is fine because racing the two, if the take gets interrupted, the element remains in the queue. So I think this is fine. You could end up in a situation with this implementation where if a user's typing a lot, this doesn't get fired till like the user's done typing. Like you could block this on this, which is maybe what we want. I don't know. I haven't really thought about this problem at all. But yeah, the biggest thing I'd like to see is removing this.
I'd say that probably one would prioritize the user events over maybe the stream events. Not sure. Because at least you get like a nice terminal experience.
All right, well, that was an interesting discussion. Anybody else have things they want us to talk about?
Let's check again.
Can you explain what's the difference between this modification or handling it outside the prompt at the agent level? Well, so Ariel, I think that this this prompt thingy here is not really for agents specifically. This prompt is the module from the CLI, not the AI prompt module. So this allows you to build like custom command line application prompts. So for example, like Lloyd, who opened this PR, has this effect boxes library. Is there any like, what was the name of the effect stack? Stack effect. Oh my God. Okay, can't find this right now. Let me go back to Lloyd's GitHub. Here's your GitHub. Stack effect. Are there no? I thought there was a GIF.
There is a GIF. Yeah, there's a GIF.
So these like prompts here are what we're talking about.
For example,
not AI prompts. But just to answer the question in the context of like a CLI prompt, the question that Lloyd had, or the suggestion here, the reason why he wants to be able to feed a custom event source in here is because process will only be called under the hood on user input events. And it does require basically like what Lloyd did here, which is hacking around like the terminal interface to be able to join the queues together. Whereas if we have a design that allows you to pass an external event queue in, you could theoretically merge input events and other events coming in to this render loop for that CLI prompt.
Maybe another approach could be, instead one could change the return.
Okay, some examples.
Maybe I'd say something that does not make sense, but probably another way to get the same behavior could be to change the return type of the process from being a signature that returns an effect to maybe a signature that returns a stream, and then in the stream you can return either nothing, and that means that you just recall again process without changing the state, or you return this new state, and then basically that will again re-invoke on next render the same state.
Could be. I think the goal I had in mind when I first designed this was to just be a very simple state machine.
Yeah.
But anyway, Lloyd, let us know when you've had a chance to look into this stuff. I think there's some interesting things you can do at the type level with the signature. And if we do that, we should add type tests for this as well. Because now we're trying to be better about anytime we add stuff to modules that is like relies on TypeScript logic to do something right, we're trying to be better about introducing, where is it? Packages, effect, type test. We're trying to be better about introducing type tests. Anyway, anything else anybody wants us to talk about or look at?
Let's see.
If not, then we can probably
Doesn't
close
seem
out
so.
office hours. Hope that trying again. Any news regarding an effect Google AI on V4? It was a real blocker for me to migrate from V3 to V4. 99% of users are blocked on upgrading
By
to
Google
effect
AI.
V4. 99% are blocked on the AI Google being ported over. I'm just kidding, obviously. But I don't have any plans to port Google AI over to V4 yet because I'm still gathering feedback on the existing implementations. And it is very laborious to manage all these AI providers. We're moving away from using the generated clients for them and instead having specific schemas that we maintain to avoid like the schema churn, especially because like most of these providers OpenAI specs are just completely wrong all the time. And so when you like generate a client out of it, it's just wrong always. But yeah, I would review a PR maybe, but I don't have a tremendous amount of spare time to review enormous PRs at the moment. So if there was a PR added, it would need to be very well tested for me to take a look. I'd love to know the deal with the effect skills versus Kit Langdon's effect solutions versus Max's recommended approach of raw dogging Git subtrees. Well, the effect skill, the effect, and just to be clear about what we're talking about, let me share my screen again. This is the one. Why did it open up down here on this monitor? Effect TS skills. This skills library is still extremely work in progress. That said, I mean, you can feel free to give it a try. Let us know how it's working for you. But this skill will do the dance of getting a copy of the effect repository into your project for you once you load it. So there's like logic in here to instruct your agent, effect references, setup. There's stuff in here for like telling the agent how to do this. That being said, and it gives you the options of like how you want to do it. That being said, like Mike said in the chat, it's definitely not ready yet for like mass adoption or usage. So like in the interim, I would definitely recommend just cloning the repo locally yourself. You could try this skill, but again, it's not recommended for production use yet. We're still like working on this. And then effect solutions from Kit is at this point a community project. Effect solutions. So it's not something we're maintaining. This is like a Kit's recommended setup. That said, it does a reasonably good job, but like there has been some drift, and I'm not sure how maintained effect solutions is at this point in time. Looks like the last commit Kit had was 2 months ago, so maybe not super well maintained at this point. I don't know. Yeah. So personally, at the bare minimum, I would do what I recommended in my blog post a while ago and just clone it into your project however you prefer, and go from there. Can you convince me that Git subtrees are better than Git submodules? Read this blog post and I will convince you. Outdated effect solutions is blocking Effect v4 adoption. 99% of users get started with Effect 4 by using effect.solutions. But yeah, there's some context on why I prefer subtrees over submodules here. You can also just clone the project yourself, but I don't like having a full clone of the project sitting in my projects. I prefer to make the Git tree part of my Git tree, like instead of having two separate Git folders in my project. So, but whatever floats your boat is fine. Anyway, I think we are going to close out office hours here. If there's any additional questions, post them in the office hours chat. Otherwise, thank you all very much for coming and attending office hours again this week. Hope you all enjoyed my presentation. Let us know what you think in Discord. Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much, Mattia, for coming and hanging out. We will see you all next week.
Yes. Cheers,
everybody.